Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Fredericksburg, Virginia battlefield. Specifically, we are standing in what is called Slaughter Pen. It was not called Slaughter Pen at the time of the war. This was actually a huge plantation owned by one Bernard, whose plantation home would have been behind Sarah at the Rappahannock River, which, as the crows fly, from where I'm standing, the Rappahannock River is probably about, give it, a mile and a half. Why are we standing out here today? Well, at the time that I am standing here, if this was 158 years ago, you would see thousands of troops standing here. This is the 158th anniversary of the Battle of Fredericksburg. Actually, it is day 3 of the anniversary. It started on December 11th. December 12th, there was not a lot of action going on. Today, December 13th, 1862, would be the big fight. This is when everything would happen. So, I decided to come here for a specific reason. The Fredericksburg battlefield is really we'll even say maybe even 3-dimensional in its size. The problem is that most people don't ever realize how big this battlefield really is. Most people, when they think Fredericksburg, they think of one specific area. And what they think about is basically in the distance, if you can see in the camera, there's a water tower out there. Now the water tower I'm just using as a marker. Around where that water tower is what's known as Marie's Heights, also known as the Sunken Road, and the Stone Wall. If you ever watch the film Gods and Generals or the Ken Burns documentary, The Civil War, well, that's pretty much all they ever really focus on. It became kind of like the spot of the Battle of Fredericksburg. It's the most infamous, the most famous, and a lot of it is because of the disparity between losses during the battle. I will say that area up there, Robert E. Lee and the Confederate Army suffered 1,000 casualties. Ambrose Burnside and the Union Army would suffer 8,000 casualties in that sector of the battlefield. So with something so big as that, you can kind of see why it becomes very, very famous for people to talk about. You know, for the Confederates, it was a great victory. For the Union, it's a sign of great loss for them. So they wanted to honor what happened in those attacks there. The thing is, the Battle of Fredericksburg, for the Confederates, there's nothing they need to do up there to change them winning that sector of the battlefield. All they got to do is stand there. For the Union Army, no matter what they do, they can't do anything to win the battle over there. So why aren't I there? Because we are at the southern end of the battlefield. This is where the Union Army could win the battle. This is where, if the Union Army does their job properly, they can affect what happens up there. It is where the Confederate Army has their greatest chance at loss. Now, where I'm standing also is an area that not a lot of people visit either. The National Park Service owns a good chunk of land here, but their chunk of land is basically the trees in the distance. All that trees in the distance, all behind that white office building that's way out there in the distance. And we'll be pointing over to that again in a little bit. That's all National Park Service property. Where we are standing right now is owned by the American Battlefield Trust. And if you hear a plane going over us, that's because there is an airport over to our left, to the right of the camera. The American Battlefield Trust owns this land because it was under threat of development. They were able to raise money, preserve it, and this is basically half of the Union attack right here on this property. If the Battle of Fredericksburg is going to be won by the Union Army, they are going to win it across this field in those trees. And they came darn close. So I'm not really going to be focusing too much on what's going on up there, because up there is a very simple story that if you even just Google it, you will find out about the futile assaults against the stone wall. In case the question comes up as to, so why did they do that? Well, the whole point is what the Union generals Burnside's plan was for this day. Burnside's plan, I'm just going to nutshell it. We're going to attack this front here in the distance behind me. We're going to hit this spot with everything we've got. While this attack is going on, At the northern end of the field is where we will send up troops in a diversionary attack. Just keep the troops that are up there in that very strong position busy. When we break this line that's behind me, the Union general down here, his name is William Franklin, I'll show you a photo of him in a minute, he will start rolling up the flank. What that means is basically, if I am the Confederate line, and this is the line that's behind me right now, my arm, and it breaks, Franklin goes right through here and separates. And then he starts basically rolling up the line is, he fights up. He's going to fight up the line like this. And if I'm right here, the very strong stone wall, the northern end of the field, they then have to deal with not only troops coming from their front, but from their side as well. Which then would mean that that position now that's so strong gets weakened. That's what the plan was. As much as Ambrose Burnside gets a lot of flack in history as an imbecile, buffoon, an idiot, incompetent, this is actually in the annals of Civil War battle plans, a very, very strong one. It's actually a really good battle plan by Ambrose Burnside. Problem is, a whole lot of things go wrong from Burnside as soon as he starts to take command of this army. We're not going to go through all that. That goes back into November of 1862. The way to get across the Rappahannock River was completely delayed due to a lot of incompetence with logistics and getting pontoon bridges down here, so on and so forth. A long delay of trying to get those bridges built because of troops from Mississippi under General William Barksdale in town. And then, well, finally they take the town on December 11th, the Union Army. And so after all that delay of being here for over a month, the Confederate Army strengthens their position. So on December 12th, Burnside comes up with his plan of attack, and now we're going to start introducing our people here and let you learn a little bit about Slaughter Pen Farm. So really quick, our commanding officer of the Union Army is one Ambrose Burnside. You ever wonder where the term sideburns came from? There you go. You can thank him for Elvis. Our commanding officer down here in the southern end of the field is one William Franklin. Do you remember what I said about the orders that Burnside is going to send to Franklin about attack that position out there in the distance, attack it with everything you got, break that line, roll up the flank while while the diversion is going on, keeping those guys busy up there. The next morning, he tells Franklin this on December 12th. Again, my date's so crazy here. On the morning of December 13th, the official orders arrive to William Franklin, and when he reads them, he interprets them differently than what he heard the generals say the day before. Attack with one division. Keep it supported. Be prepared to move down the Richmond Stage Road. Now, I'm paraphrasing and shortening up the orders there, but what does that boil down to? Well, you can't see it, but the Richmond Stage Road is behind Sarah. And the Richmond Stage Road is basically a road that goes from Fredericksburg to my left to Richmond to my right. It's a straight shot. Straight as an arrow. When Franklin reads that, he's reading that and he's thinking, okay, well, my men are going to be on the Richmond Stage Road being prepared to move down, and it's going that way. What about all these guys out here? Why am I attacking with such minimal amount of men? Well, Franklin, who is known as a McClellanite, look it up. He is going to take those orders, interpret them how he wants, and, well, for the most part, this will be his last command as a general in the field. One of the big mistakes that he makes is he does not send anybody to clarify what these orders mean, even though they sound differently from the night before. As soon as they sounded different from the night before, Franklin should have done something about it. One of the things he does say is that he thought everything changed. I thought I became the diversion here, and the attacks up in town at the stone wall was the main attack, which did not happen, and that's one of the big reasons why the attacks up there kept going and were so futile and a lot of blood loss for the Union troops. Basically, it all comes down to a map. Ambrose Burnside has a map at his headquarters, and on this map, that straight as an arrow Richmond Stage Road bends and goes right through the woods in the distance. So in Burnside's mind, when he's saying be prepared to move down the Richmond Stage Road, he's thinking that Franklin is going to have his troops going that way. but he's not. Franklin's going to have troops up on that road. Franklin is going to have the most minimal amount of troops attack across these fields. And about when we get to the end of the day on December 13th, there's probably going to be about 30,000 Union soldiers standing up on that road who will never see combat on December 13th. And it's a very amazing thing because Franklin has about 42,000 soldiers here. The troops in the distance, not only are they not dug in, the Confederate troops, not only are they not dug in into a strong position, but Franklin alone outnumbers him. And I'm going to introduce you to who's down there in a minute. The men down there are only about maybe 34,000 men, Confederates. Franklin's got 40 to 42. Franklin alone, in this southern end of the Fredericksburg battlefield, outnumbers half of Robert E. Lee's army. That's an amazing thing. You don't even need to worry about the Union troops that are up in town at that northern end of the field. So already the advantage is the Union army. But right now, that's not what's going to happen. In the end, probably only about maybe 12 to 14,000 Union troops are going to fight in these fields. Just to continue laying out what this land looks like before we shift gears over to the woods. This land here that you can see behind me, nicely preserved. This is not the only portion of what was considered slaughter pen. As I mentioned earlier, this was slated for development. There is a office park over there, as you can see. That's who is going to try to expand into this area and build. I am going to be talking about that area, but you don't need to continuously see it because it's ugly and it's an office park and the scenery behind me is much nicer. So that, when I mention certain men, they will be, I'll say, over in the office park, but we don't need to pan over there to see that again. The generals that are going to be attacking, the generals that are chosen is under the 1st Corps. General John Reynolds is the Corps commander. I don't have his photo. I should actually get his photo. Over in the office park, for our Gettysburg aficionados, you'll definitely know who this guy is one George Gordon Meade. He's over in that office park that you just saw. He has got one of the smallest divisions in the Union Army. So not only is Franklin attacking with very few men, he's using one of his smallest divisions in the entire army. These are troops from Pennsylvania. They're known as the Pennsylvania Reserves. Basically, long and short of why they're called the Pennsylvania Reserves. At the outset of the war, when Lincoln called for volunteers, Pennsylvania had a huge turnout, so much so that they had to turn away a lot of young men, and they created Pennsylvania Reserve units, and basically, if we need you, we'll call you. Well, they needed them. They called them. And they were going to give them designations, meaning 91st Pennsylvania, 92nd Pennsylvania, stuff like that. They said, no. If we were the Pennsylvania Reserves then, we're the Pennsylvania Reserves now. And so they kept that moniker as the Pennsylvania Reserves. That's who they are. This field behind me, one guy, and my Civil War buff people will definitely know who this is, John Gibbon. He is the creator of one of the most famous brigades of the war, the Iron Brigade. Troops from Wisconsin, Michigan, and let's not get into Wisconsin and Michigan in current terms, current political terms. Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana. See, just messed up. But the Iron Brigade, one of the more famous brigades of the entire war. His division is going to be going across this field behind me. Very interesting thing. For those of you that know a little bit about the Civil War, you may have heard one of its many nicknames. Brother versus brother. John Gibbon, born Pennsylvania, but family moved to North Carolina. When North Carolina seceded, Gibbon stayed loyal to the Union. The rest of his brothers were in the Confederate Army. And not only that, they were under the command of one guy, and I don't have his photo here, of James Lane. James Lane's North Carolinians. Where is James Lane's North Carolinians? Right there. So Gibbon is going to be attacking his brothers on December 13th, 1862. Lane is actually one of the frontline generals right down past this one lone tree in the distance. He will be the first line that gets hit by Gibbon. So, brother versus brother here at Fredericksburg. So who is in the distance besides James Lane? Who is James Lane's commanding officers? Well, let's just introduce these guys real quick. Commanding officer of the Confederate Army, as we know, Robert E. Lee, his headquarters is way out there. There's no way for me to pinpoint it for you guys. The commanding officer of this sector here that we're standing in across from us is under the command of this guy. His name is Thomas Jonathan Jackson, more known famously as Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson is the commanding officer of the southern end of the battlefield. So we're not going to really worry a whole lot about a lot of these guys here with their photos. I just want to introduce you to some of them. So what occurs here is basically, much like the northern end of the field, a futile assault, but with a lot more results to it. And that's just because nobody was prepared to do anything. Gibbon, for his troops that are going to be going across this field, think of it kind of like when you're at the beach and you're going into the water. Gibbon is set up in 3 lines. He has 3 lines of men. The first line has got 5 regiments. Basically, here's an acronym that I use on my tours. If you don't know the Army makeup, cloudy days bring rain. A corps, cloudy. A division, days. Brigade, brings. Regiment, rain. Cloudy days bring rain. Corps, division, brigade, regiment. So you can always use that to kind of remember how the Army makeup is. So he's going to have frontline brigade. So he's the division commander. Frontline brigade is going to be going in this way across this field here, and then he's got a brigade behind that one, and then a brigade behind that one. Now think of it like when you're going into the water. You start going into the ocean, and a wave comes, but usually it's already lost some steam when you're coming up, so that first wave is actually very, like, boop, nothing really too much. A lot of that is because those troops were green. What green troops mean, just they're rookies. They're rookies. The 3 middle regiments actually take off and run. They run. As soon as they're starting to get into a fight out there in the distance against Lane's North Carolinians, they take off and run, basically leaving the 2 veteran regiments out there separated from each other with nobody in the middle. So it was a very dangerous situation. The second line comes in, and as you're going into the water at the beach, and basically comes up and just kind of like hits you in the chest and moves you back a little bit. So it's a little harder of a wave hitting you. Then the third line is our pros, our hardcore veterans. These men are going to come in, and that is the wave that is going to knock you underwater. When the wave comes in, goes over your head, and all of a sudden you're underwater drinking salt water and feeling horrible afterwards. That is going to be the third wave that goes in. Again, if you Google it, there is actually a painting, I don't know if it's Mort Kunstler or whomever, of the attack down there at what's called the railroad. There is a railroad in the distance. We're not lucky enough to get a train going by. If one pops up, we'll try to film it. That railroad bed is the main line of Jackson. In the distance, though, out this way, the white office building. That white office building is actually the only office building of some sort of substance. Not because it was here at the time of the battle, but because it's a good marker for what's going to happen on that side of the field. So overall, I kind of gave you a quick overview of what's going on with Gibbon right here. But let's just back it up for a second and take you to the morning of December 13th. And of course, your science class. 1862, there's no daylight savings. There's no time zone, so you got to kind of adjust the time. I actually know it better during the springtime. I'm not exactly sure what time it would be right now. Because, I mean, it's about 10:48 in the morning, 2020. I think you got to adjust it maybe 2 hours. 2 hours back in time. So if I'm standing here at 10:48 in the morning making this video in 1862, it would actually maybe be 8:48 or 8:49 in the morning, their time, which means this is happening right now when I'm standing here. The initial assault that's supposed to be coming across, Gibbon here where I'm standing, Meade going through the office park, it gets delayed numerous times. One of the big times where it gets delayed is in the distance, in that office park area, George Meade, he can't move. And that's because he's getting hammered. He's getting shot at by a cannon that they can't see. It's one cannon holding up the entire southern attack. And really quick story, that cannon is done by this young man, 21 years old, from Alabama. His name is John Pelham. John Pelham is in command of Jeb Stuart's light artillery. Light artillery, basically the gun's very light. He's got one cannon that he is using in an area which today is now a Family Dollar parking lot, but back then he had a nice bush line in front of him. He could see George Meade's men in that area, the office park. And because it's a light gun, Pelham is just firing one shot, hooking the gun up, and he's moving it all over the place to the whole point that nobody can find him. So when Pelham does this, he does it for about an hour. He stops because his gun is running hot. He doesn't want it to blow up. But basically for 1 hour, the morning of December 13th, 1862, that one gun holds up the entire Southern attack. Another interesting thing is that it is currently December 13th, the anniversary of the battle. You can see what I'm wearing. It's pretty warm. Well, it's actually kind of interesting because this was probably the weather at the time of the battle. It was unseasonably warm. It was about mid-60s, which I think when we got here was about 65 degrees. So right now we are kind of feeling exactly what the soldiers would have felt at the time of the battle. One thing that I'll say is that I am standing in very solid ground. Now, of course, these are fields that would have been harvested and stuff like that because of the plantation area. But a lot of this ground, and because there had been some days of rain, a lot of this ground during the night when the temperatures go down to freezing was frozen. Because of all these delays of Franklin not understanding the orders and Pelham doing his thing out there and getting online to get the attack moving, the ground has gotten warmer and warmer, which means that it's not solid like this. It's actually, and I don't know, there is some stuff out here that you can maybe see, a lot of puddles of mud out there. That would have been all of this. That's what they're marching through. That's what the Union troops are going to march through as they go through this field 158 years ago today. For George Meade's men that are over in that office park, those Pennsylvanian reserves, they're going to be getting hammered. The other thing about that white building that you cannot really tell is that right behind it is an area called Prospect Hill. That is the target. That's what they want to get. The Union troops take Prospect Hill. They take a railroad depot that would have been there at the time. That's Robert E. Lee's main supply line. You take that railroad depot, you take that spot, not only do you cut Lee off from his supply line, but again, you roll up the flank and attack towards town where James Longstreet's Confederates are defending that very strong stone wall. So, with that being said, obviously a lot of artillery is going to be over there. The ground would have been a lot more wide open, obviously not an office park over there. George Meade's men are going to reach a certain point, mainly the train tracks that are down there, and they are going to look to try to take cover, and there is one spot that they see that they can take cover. They're going to find, kind of like by where that white office building is, I keep using it as a good example, a finger of trees sticking out. Basically in this wide open, vast plantation is this one spot where these line of trees come out. The Pennsylvanians find those trees, they go in, they make their way through a nasty swamp, and they find the one spot that Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson looked over. They kind of looked at it and figured nobody was going to be able to attack through there. They plugged it with one little brigade from South Carolina. The Pennsylvanians came up, they saw them because of the fog and the smoke from all the artillery and the gunfire going on. South Carolinians couldn't really see them. They thought that the shadows they saw were troops going back and forth, their own troops, moving help back and forth at different parts of the battlefield. Well, it wasn't. It was troops from Pennsylvania. Pennsylvanians use that smoke and fog, they fire, and they take out those South Carolinians. George Meade's men found the one and only opening. From that point on, the Pennsylvanians are going to get very close to taking the Prospect Hill. Reserves are not going to come, though. Jackson's going to be able to bring up his reserves faster than George Meade can get any reserves, and at that point, all hope was lost. Gibbon across this field here will break the train tracks. He'll push into the trees in the distance. But again, troops under a familiar guy, I actually do have his photo here, by the name of Jubal Early. It's his reserves that are coming up, troops from Georgia, and they are going to basically come up and plug up the hole that the Pennsylvanians found. They're going to push Gibbon back across. There are going to be some reserves that go across this field here. I'm really summing this all up. It's a lot more detailed than all this. The bottom line is that when this one attack happens, they get close with this very minimal size attack to doing what exactly Burnside wanted. But once this ends at 2:30 p.m. on December 13th, 1862, and Gibbon's pushed out, Meade's pushed out, whatever reserves come up under David Bell Birney gets pushed out, and that line is sealed, for the most part, the fighting down here ceases. There is a small twilight attack by Jackson. There is some fighting out in the distance in front of John Bell Hood's front, out that way, called Deep Run. But for the most part, the attacks here stop, while 30,000 Union troops in town attack and attack and attack and attack and attack, constantly attacking against that stone wall. For what? What did I say? They can't change this battle. They could. And you know what? They did. But not the Union troops that were standing here. The Confederates did. They were able to save their line, and when the Battle of Fredericksburg ended today, the total amount of casualties for the Confederates was around 5,200 men. Most of that was down here. About 4,200 men for Stonewall Jackson was lost. And about, oddly enough, about 4,200 men, give or take, for Franklin on this side. But when you consider it's 4,200 men for Jackson for his entire 34,000 men, that's a good percentage, if you want to look at it like that. Franklin barely put any men in, and he lost 4,200 men. So the percentage is actually way higher for troops engaged for the Union troops. When you bring in that other end of the line, if you remember from earlier in the video, I mentioned 1,000 for the Confederates, 8,000 for the Union at the northern end, which meant 5,200 losses for the Confederates, 12,200 losses for the Union troops. It was one of the most lopsided victories of the war for Robert E. Lee. It would really, at this point, boost him to that iconic level that we all know him to be today. This very almost godlike stature. Also, a lot of the confidence in Confederate leadership was boosted. Troops in the Confederate Army loving Robert E. Lee, loving Stonewall Jackson, loving James Longstreet, loving Jeb Stuart. They felt invincible. And this momentum would continue through the Battle of Chancellorsville, which would be the next battle after the Battle of Fredericksburg in May of 1863. And then Robert E. Lee would take that confidence, roll the dice big time after the Battle of Chancellorsville. And in June of 1863, he would start his troops north, which would eventually culminate in the Battle of Gettysburg. As I'm going to end here, I hope you enjoyed this. There was a request on Facebook from a friend of mine out in Seattle asking about his great-great-great-grandfather. I think you had 3 G's on there, Richard. So, 83rd New York. Now, you've obviously done some probably research yourself. You know he was under Gibbon's command. Here's the 83rd New York. 83rd New York is right there. Can you see anything here? Then you get... Can you still see me? I don't know what to do. All right, sorry about that. I don't know what you can see right now, so I'm not sure what I'm pointing at. So the 83rd New York is right here. Front line under a brigade of Taylor, Division Gibbon, Corps Reynolds, and of course the Grand Division Commander is William Franklin. So the 83rd New York is one of the first units. There's Lane's North Carolinians who are just past the railroad, which means, give or take, I mean, I can't exactly pinpoint it, but I'm just going to kind of move out of the way at this moment. Your ancestor, Richard, is going across this field today. And you mentioned that he was wounded here, so he is going across this field right now, 158 years ago. Can I exactly say, as I look at the map, and totally pinpoint it? Well, I would say that judging by where the finger of trees are, maybe if when you come here, there is a walking trail out this way, I would say you are almost along that walking trail going to be where he was. So I would say a trail, you may be able to see a marker over there by the trees where all this nasty hay is all stacked up. That walking trail may be the closest that you're going to get. And at least you can have very close ties to where your great-great-grandfather is, as I'm getting tangled up in court. So I hope all of you enjoyed a little bit. Again, I came out here to kind of do this to show you an unknown portion of the Fredericksburg battlefield on the day that it happened 158 years ago today. So when you come here, if you come get tours from our company, Fredericksburg Tours, you can see this area. Most people, again, will see the northern end of the field up there, and a lot of times they'll just follow the Park Service road, which runs through the trees, and miss the Union approach here. So that's why I chose this spot today. And again, if you wind your clocks back and get it right via no time zones or daylight savings, about 2 hours. This is all going on. So everybody have a good day. Hope you enjoyed.